Dark comedies are a unique genre that blends humor with the bleak and the macabre, tackling taboo subjects and grim realities with a satirical edge. These films find laughter in the unlikeliest of places, offering a cathartic way to explore uncomfortable truths about society and human nature. By juxtaposing lighthearted wit with serious or unsettling themes, dark comedies challenge audiences to confront the absurdity of life's darkest aspects, turning what might be disturbing or painful into something unexpectedly funny. Let's look at 20 comedies that allow us to laugh at our mortality, our anxieties, and the various forms of societal collapse. Arsenic and Old Lace revolves around two elderly sisters who are motivated by a warped sense of benevolence to murder lonely old bachelors. The film conveys its chilling narrative in the form of a fast-paced farce, with creepy incidents mingling with slapstick gags. The Ladykillers is as dark as it gets. A group of criminals disguise as musicians while preparing a bank robbery in a boarding house. This British classic contrasts British politeness and gruesome murder as the gang is foiled by their little old landlady. The film satirizes British values and the veneer of politeness that can mask darker impulses. The film makes light of the conniving gangster's deadly downfall with darkly comic justice. Dr. Strangelove, Stanley Kubrick's satire on nuclear annihilation, humorously explores humanity's self-destructive tendencies, creating an unsettling juxtaposition of laughter and the horrors of global conflict. This is perhaps the strongest contender for the darkest comedy film of all time. Its portrayal of military and political incompetence in the face of apocalypse is chillingly funny. Network, which earned 10 Oscar nominations, is the most prestigious film on this list. This satire of media exploitation and the desperation for ratings is prophetic in its darkness, illustrating how far people and networks are willing to go for fame and influence. The end features Burt Reynolds as a dying man who chooses to commit suicide rather than endure a prolonged and painful death. The film explores themes of mortality with a mix of dark humor and existential despair. Veteran comedy writer Jerry Belson manages within his script to confront terminal illness, depression, suicide, death, and the meaning of life in a way that's unsettling yet still funny. Better Off Dead involves a teenage boy contemplating suicide over a breakup. While wrapped in quirky teen comedy, the film slyly mocks depression, suicide, and obsessive teenage angst. Its absurd take on its heavy themes makes it an unforgettably dark comedy. Arsenic and Old Lace was the preeminent dark comedy of the 1940s. The Ladykillers was the dark comedy of the 1950s. Dr. Strangelove was the dark comedy of the 1960s. Network was the dark comedy of the 1970s, but many dark comedies vied for prominence during a distinct and fascinating 12-year period between 1987 and 1999. Throw Mama from the Train mocks the terrible lengths to which people will go when consumed by anger and resentment. This dark comedy centers on a writer, Larry, Billy Crystal, who has been numb from shock since his devious ex-wife achieved fame and fortune from plagiarizing his book. Owen, Danny DeVito, a student in Larry's writing class, hatches a plan inspired by the film Strangers on a Train to crisscross murders.
Now, here's my idea. It's so simple, too. Two fellows meet accidentally, like you and me. Each one has somebody that he'd like to get rid of. So, they swap murders.
Swap murders?
Each fellow does the other fellow's murder. Then there's nothing to connect them. Each one has murdered a total stranger. Like, you do my murder, I do yours. Your wife, my father. Crisscross. Some people are better off dead. Each one has murdered a total stranger. They swap murders. You do my murder. Crisscross. I do yours. They swap murders. Crisscross. Crisscross.
Owen proposes to murder Larry's ex-wife in exchange for Larry murdering Owen's mother. The film's humor is largely rooted in the dysfunctional relationship that exists between Owen and his tyrannical mother. Mama, played by Anne Ramsey, conveys a viciousness that is as comedic as it is grotesque.
Owen loves his mama. Owen loves his mama. Owen loves his Hurry up with that soda!
Coming, Mama.
Hand me, Mama. I'm choking to death, you moron. You're too damn slow.
I'm sorry, Mama.
I'm sorry, Mama. Why didn't you get me the salted nuts?
The salted ones are no good for you.
The unsalted ones make me choke. You clumsy poop! What'd you do that for?
Here, murder is trivialized as a slapstick farce, pushing the audience to find humor in morally questionable acts. The film manages in the end to make something hilarious out of something heinous. Beetlejuice takes death, the afterlife and ghoulish mischief, and spins it into a comedy full of dark humor, reveling in the macabre while making it palatable for a mainstream audience. The film's gothic aesthetic and the shocking pranks of the ghostly Beetlejuice push the envelope of dark humor.
No, we just want to get some people out of our house.
I understand. Well, look, in order to do that, I'm really gonna have to get to know you guys. You know, we gotta get closer, move in with you for a while, get to be real pals, you know what I'm saying? And save that guy for later, huh?
My wife and I would like to ask you a couple of questions.
Sure. Go ahead, shoot.
Well, for instance, what are your qualifications?
Well, I attended Juilliard. I'm a graduate of the Harvard Business School. I travel quite extensively. I lived through the Black Plague, and I had a pretty good time during that. I've seen The Exorcist about 167 times, and it keeps getting funnier every single time I see it. Not to mention the fact that you're talking to a dead guy. Now, what do you think? You think I'm qualified?
Heathers tells the story of a high school student, Veronica, Winona Ryder, and her involvement with J.D., Christian Slater, a new student with a penchant for anarchistic philosophy and a murderous streak. Together, they begin eliminating the popular kids at their high school, framing each death as a suicide. Heathers mixes high school comedy with gothic horror elements, with dialogue that's deeply cynical. This high school satire dives deep into the twisted side of high school culture, exploring peer pressure, bullying, cliques, teen suicide, and the desperate pursuit of popularity. The film uses sharp wit and shocking scenes to expose social pressures and youth nihilism. It critiques the harsh social dynamics and cruelty in high school, where popularity and conformity can lead to dehumanization. The film's dark humor comes from the absurdity of its premise, mixed with real-world issues. Weekend at Bernie's follows two young employees, Larry and Richard, who discover their boss Bernie dead at his luxurious beach home in the Hamptons. Guests suddenly arrive at the home for a party. Rather than contact the police, the pair pretends that Bernie is alive to enjoy the party and indulge in the perks of Bernie's lavish lifestyle. The film becomes decidedly macabre as the protagonists manipulate Bernie's lifeless body to fool others into thinking that their host is having a good time. The body of Bernie serves as both a punchline and a grim reminder of mortality, blurring the line between comedy and tragedy. By turning a corpse into a comedy prop, Larry and Richard demonstrate a shameless willingness to manipulate a man's death for their own advantage. The film's tone is more farcical and lighthearted compared to Heather's, with death being treated as a humorous inconvenience rather than a moral horror. The dark humor here is situational, with the absurdity of dragging a corpse around providing the laughs rather than deep ethical dilemmas. War of the Roses exposes the depths of human pettiness and vengeance that can emerge during a bitter divorce. Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner deliver compelling performances as Oliver and Barbara Rose, a couple whose escalating hostilities lead to a series of physically and emotionally destructive confrontations. Their luxurious home, once a symbol of their shared success and happiness, turns into a war zone and is left in horrific ruins by the end of the film. The destruction of the house serves as a metaphor for the damage of their malicious behavior. The film's dark humor lies in its exaggerated yet eerily relatable depiction of marital conflict, highlighting how love can turn to hate and civility can crumble under the weight of resentment. Danny DeVito's direction balances the absurd with the poignant, creating a cautionary tale that is both memorable and disturbing. The satirical Bonfire of the Vanities dissects the greed and moral corruption of 1980s Wall Street with dark humor, highlighting the absurd lengths people go to for wealth and power, regardless of the cost to others. Based on Tom Wolfe's novel, the story follows Sherman McCoy, Tom Hanks, a Wall Street bond trader caught in a scandal when he and his mistress hit a black teenager with their car. The film tackles spiritual decay, political manipulation, and racial tensions, using McCoy's downfall as a vehicle to critique the moral void of the upper class. It highlights how far people are willing to go to protect their status and avoid accountability. Unlike most dark comedies, which mask dark themes with absurdity, Bonfire takes a harsher, more cynical approach, aiming less for laughs and more for sharp social criticism. The film's characters are often driven by ego, greed, and self-preservation, leading to a society devoid of empathy or justice. The film highlights how media sensationalizes events for profit, further corrupting public perception and justice. It is less about individual acts of darkness and more about systemic moral failure. Bonfire is the one film on this list that I greatly dislike. Fans of Wolfe's novel complained that the film lacked the novel's nuance and complexity. The likable Hanks failed to capture McCoy's arrogant nature, which was vital to the story. The director, Brian De Palma, was misguided in his efforts to balance the film's comedy and drama. The success of a dark comedy is very much dependent on comedy elements and dramatic elements blending together. Finally, it was a common complaint of critics that De Palma's flashy visuals and melodramatic flair overshadowed the film's message and characters. If a good review of this film exists, I've never seen it. Though generally lighthearted and family-friendly, The Addams Family twists the family values narrative, celebrating morbid humor and a love for the macabre. The Addams' gruesome lifestyle and their casual regard for death provide a darkly humorous undercurrent, especially in the family's interactions with their normal neighbors. The filmmakers managed to make the film's dark aesthetic both approachable and subversive.
Gangrene.
Uncle Fester, how do you know so much?
I've been around. I pick things up.
In the Bermuda Triangle.
Look, children, a new chapter. Scabs.
Barton Fink captures existential dread and mental breakdowns as it follows a pious New York playwright whose Hollywood aspirations warp into a surreal nightmare. The film explores writer's block, insanity, and the underbelly of Hollywood. A variety of bizarre and grotesque elements adds to the film's dark humor.
They say I'm a madman, Bart, but I'm not mad at anyone. Honest, I'm not. Most guys I just feel sorry for. It tears me up inside to think about what they're going through, how trapped they are. I know what it feels like when things get all balled up at the head office. It puts you through hell, Barton. So I help people out. I just wish someone would do as much for me. Jesus, it's hot. Sometimes it gets so hot I want to crawl right out of my skin.
But Charlie, why me? Why?
Because you don't listen!
Jesus. I'm dripping again. Come on, Barton. You think you know pain? You think I made your life hell? Take a look around this dump. You're just a tourist with a typewriter, Barton. I live here. Don't you understand that? And you come into my home and you complain that I'm making too much noise.
John Waters' fascination with true crime stories inspired him to make Serial Mom. The story involves a do-gooder suburban mom who commits murders over minor social infractions, making a mockery of her strict moral values through her appalling acts of violence. Films from the late 1980s and early 1990s pushed comedy into darker, edgier places, each exploring twisted themes and taboo subjects. Although they differ in tone and narrative style, all of these films showcased elements of satire, black humor, and social critique. Each film critiques social issues, but the focus shifts. Heathers satirizes teen culture. Bonfire takes aim at greed, racism, and the moral failings of the elite. Throw, Mama, and Weekend at Bernie's are less direct in social commentary, but still offer a critique of dysfunctional relationships and self-interest. Weekend at Bernie's stands out as the lightest, relying on situational comedy rather than moral depth, whereas Heathers, Barton Fink, Serial Mom, and Bonfire are much darker in tone and more satirical. Throw Mama occupies a middle ground, with dark humor that verges on slapstick. Together, these films showcase the range and versatility of dark comedy, using humor to dissect difficult themes, including death, greed, adolescent angst, and dysfunctional family relationships. While they each have their unique style, the mix of cynicism, social critique, and black humor points to an era when comedy managed to explore the darker corners of human nature. 3 very dark comedies appeared in the late 1990s. The Cable Guy, a social critique on media obsession and loneliness, portrays a troubled young man's descent into madness. Yes, it's a comedy. The story unfolds through a series of disturbing interactions between a cable technician, Chip Douglas, Jim Carrey, and a client, Stephen Kovach, Matthew Broderick. Stephen is mild-mannered, polite, and somewhat reserved. He recently broke up with his girlfriend, and he is focused on winning her back. Chip, who craves friendship and connection, quickly becomes fixated on Stephen, trying to force a bond through increasingly invasive and bizarre behavior. Despite Stephen's repeated attempts to set boundaries, Chip's antics escalate from innocent pranks to dangerous stunts, putting Stephen's relationship's job and sanity on the line. Stephen becomes a reluctant foil to Chip's obsessive personality, desperately trying to break free from Chip's twisted version of friendship while keeping his life together. The Cable Guy is an unsettling mix of comedy and psychological thriller. Many moments in the film verge on horror. Carrey is fascinating in his performance as the manic stalker. His performance is a far cry from his usual slapstick roles, blending comedy with unnerving menace. The film's chaotic pace reflects Chip's disjointed and unpredictable personality. Stephen undergoes a transformation from a somewhat passive individual to someone who must confront his own fears and boundaries. The Cable Guy questions identity and media influence through exaggerated comic scenarios. The film's style is unrelentingly aggressive, featuring bright colors, over-the-top performances, and an explosive soundtrack. Fargo presents a strange story of crime, violence, and tragedy that is both horrifying and humorous, challenging audiences to laugh at the misfortune and incompetence of 3 homicidal kidnappers. Jerry Lundegaard, played by William H. Macy, is a struggling car salesman in financial trouble. Desperate for money, he concocts a plan to have his wife, Jean, kidnapped so he can collect a hefty ransom from her wealthy father, Wade Gustafson. To carry out the plan, he hires 2 criminals, Carl Showalter, Steve Buscemi, and Geir Grimsrud, Peter Stormare, who are supposed to kidnap Jean and split the ransom money with Jerry. However, things quickly spiral out of control, leading to a series of unplanned murders. Enter Marge Gunderson, Frances McDormand, the pregnant police chief of Brainerd, Minnesota, whose small-town intuition and dogged persistence guide her investigation. Marge's calm, homespun demeanor sets her apart from the brutish and reckless Carl and Geir. McDormand's portrayal of Marge brings warmth and humanity to the otherwise bleak story. The cold landscapes and colder deeds seem less harsh with her around. Opposite her, Macy's desperate bumbling car salesman Jerry is an everyday man who becomes entangled in extraordinary circumstances due to his own avarice and stupidity. As Marge uncovers the conspiracy, the kidnappers grow increasingly reckless, leading to a violent showdown in the snow. The quiet rural setting and deadpan characters create a sense of mundane normalcy, which contrasts sharply with the gruesome criminal acts unfolding. Fargo is both absurd and chilling, blending horror with a quirky regional charm. The Coen brothers, who wrote and directed the film, use a minimalistic, almost documentary-like approach with a wide-angle lens, giving a stark, realistic feel to bizarre events.
Okay. I want you to tell me what these fellas looked like.
Well, the little guy, he was kind of funny looking.
In what way?
I don't know, just funny looking.
Can you be any more specific?
I couldn't really say. He wasn't circumcised.
Was he funny looking apart from that?
Yeah.
So, you were having sex with a little fella then?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Hey, they said they were going to the Twin Cities.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, is that useful to you?
Oh, you betcha, yeah.
Yeah.
Election, which examines a cutthroat high school election, humorously critiques ambition, pettiness, and hypocrisy, creating discomfort through characters willing to do anything to win. The film, which entails election rigging, adultery, and statutory rape, is deeply cynical about human nature. Tracy Flick, played by Reese Witherspoon, is a go-getter student who expects to run unopposed for student government president. She is chilling in her willingness to follow her ambition to a ruthless extreme. Witherspoon's calculated, perky performance adds distinct layers to the satire. Tracy is both villain and victim. Her intense focus on achieving success comes at the cost of social connections and friendships, leaving her isolated and lonely. Cerberus Speed 12 of Reddit wrote, Tracy Flick is equal parts sympathetic and repulsive, winner and loser. Her plus sides are that she's clearly intelligent, is a hard worker, a self-starter, expects nothing to be handed to her on a plate, comes from a very modest background. A deleted scene showed that she pretty much lives in a trailer and gets little genuine love from her pushy mother. On the minus side, she's incredibly manipulative, has no hesitation about stepping on people's faces to get what she wants, and feels pretty much no remorse or empathy for others. It's all about her. A school government teacher, Jim McAllister, Matthew Broderick, despises Tracy and situates himself as her chief adversary. He is sure that Tracy's success will benefit no one but Tracy. He persuades a popular football player, who has been sidelined by a ski injury, to campaign against the black-hearted Tracy. McAllister's moral decline is meticulously detailed, showing how good intentions can lead to disastrous results. Tracy's unrelenting ambition and McAllister's hypocrisy mirror the cutthroat nature of real-world politics, offering a scathing commentary on the emptiness of ambition and the ethical compromises made for power. Election employs a multi-perspective narrative, with different characters narrating events from their biased viewpoints. This adds layers of irony, allowing viewers to see how each character rationalizes their questionable actions. All three films have achieved cult status, but for different reasons. The Cable Guy was initially divisive for its unusual tone, but it's now appreciated as a subversive critique of the emerging media-obsessed culture. Fargo went on to win Oscars and became a defining example of dark comedy, inspiring a critically acclaimed TV series. Election, though initially a modest success, grew into a classic for its biting take on American ambition and moral compromise. A sequel, titled Tracy Flick Can't Win, is in the works. In Bruges involves a pair of hitmen hiding out in Belgium. The hitmen, Ray, Colin Farrell, and Ken, Brendan Gleeson, have nothing to do while waiting to hear from their employer and take in the local sights to occupy their time. Ray is distraught as he accidentally killed a small boy during their last job and is contemplating suicide. Mixing beautiful scenery with ruthless violence, the film explores guilt, penance, and redemption in an ultra-dark way, using humor as a buffer for its heavy existential themes. The hitmen's casual banter about serious issues like murder and suicide adds a dark, comedic layer. Four Lions, a black comedy about jihadist terrorists, finds humor in the incompetence and absurdity of its characters, making light of a very dark subject matter. While many of these films push boundaries, Dr. Strangelove might be considered the darkest due to its subject matter, the potential end of the world due to human folly. The film treats nuclear war with such absurdity and brilliance that it remains both hilarious and terrifying.